Midwest before and has now agreed to give a presentation. Jake from First Person Prepping talking about radio.
Thank you, guys. Okay, mic is working. All right, so I am Jake. I have a small YouTube channel called First Person Prepping where I do first person instructional videos. The idea behind this is it's completely whatever I'm trying to teach you, I'm going to do it start to finish. I'm going to fast forward through the boring parts if there's no instruction involved, but there's going to be no missing steps, and it's something that you could go out and replicate on your own right away. Mainly, I focus on communications to start with because I feel like that's something that when I got into it, it took me a long time to figure out what I needed to know. And I realized that if I could have gone back in time and talked to myself, instead of spending 5 years looking in YouTube videos and doing all the research of all the technical stuff, I could have taught myself what I just needed to know to operate the radio in like an afternoon. So that's the goal of my YouTube channel. And that's also the goal of some of the radio kits I've been putting together. So today I've got a presentation called Beyond the Baofeng, Long Range HF Radio, where I'd like to talk to you about a different kind of radio that is extremely useful, extremely powerful, but there's a little bit of a technical barrier that kind of scares people off, which is why I feel like there's a lot of people who try to get into it, and then they find they get discouraged too easy. So before we get onto that, what is the Baofeng, in case you haven't heard of it, right? So these guys, you've probably seen them before. It's a $20, give or take, handheld ham radio. It does analog FM, which is most of the signals that people are trying to listen to and transmit on, and it works on two frequency bands, 2 meter and 70 centimeter. One of the reasons that they've been ubiquitous, not only are they cheap, but they can be easily unlocked to transmit outside of the ham radio bands, so people will use them on license-free frequencies like FRS and GMRS. But the big thing about them is they are ubiquitous. Like everybody knows the Baofeng UV5R. There's also a bunch of different variants of Baofeng with a bunch of different characteristics and additional features. I'm not even going to try to go into that. We'd be here all day, right? The key thing to understand about these is because of the frequency that they use, the 2 meter and 70 centimeter bands, they're basically line of sight. If you've got two guys with radios like walkie-talkies, they're going to have a range of give or take a mile. If you're standing on top of a hill and he's standing on top of a hill, it's going to be a lot longer than that, but typically pretty short. If you have a radio repeater, which is like a radio that's on a tower or an elevated platform that'll like receive your signal and then at the same time retransmit it with more power and from a better location, you might be able to get 20 or 50 miles. But this is not going to be like continent crossing range, no matter how much power you put in or no matter how good of an antenna you put in. The example I like to give is think of like an FM radio tower, right? Like your local FM radio station. They've got the best tower they can buy, as much power as they can possibly swing it. They've got all the best equipment. That range, maybe it'll cover the metro area. If they can't get further than that, you're not going to get further than that, right? So let's talk a little bit about why you might need a radio and then talk about what the Baofeng can do and what you need something else for. So the first one might be like homestead coordination. Right, I've got a homestead, I've got a fence, and I've got livestock over here, and I've got some crops over here, or I've got a security perimeter, or whatever the case may be. I want to be able to go 600 meters that away and talk to my wife or my kids who are 500 meters that away and do that without running around trying to figure out where everybody is. The Baofeng is perfect for that. That is exactly what it's designed for, and it is the right tool for the job, and it's economical, right? You might also have like a search and rescue or a defense team, right? Like you need to have 5 or 10 guys in the woods, probably within a kilometer or two, and you need to be able to coordinate who's going where to make sure that people are spread out enough to cover the right amount of ground. Baofeng is excellent for that as well, right? That's its niche. You might also have like a local disaster, like a tornado or flood, and you need to coordinate people and be like, oh, hey, we need blankets at this location in a very regional area. Maybe you can set up a repeater and cover that disaster area. You also might want to use it for intelligence gathering, right? The power just went out. What happened? Right? If my phone's not working, what happened? Or, maybe the internet's been shut down. Is there anything going on across the country? You can do a little bit of that stuff with the Baofeng, but it's going to be very limited to what's in your area. You can listen in to like a local ambulance service. If they still use analog FM, you can listen in on them and maybe get a little bit of information. But again, very limited on range. Or the one that we all like to think about, a multi-day bug out, right? I've got a bug out location that's 60 miles that away or 120 miles that away, or maybe it's a different state away. And I want to be able to check in with the guy that I'm heading towards and let him know what I'm going to get there, what I'm bringing, what issues I've run into. Baofeng's not going to cut it for that. It doesn't have the range. You might also want to check on that location before you get there, right? If I have like an unspoken agreement with my buddy, I want to make sure that whatever disaster hit me didn't hit him so bad that he's got nothing to, he can't offer shelter either. Or I want to make sure that he knows I'm on my way and he's not coming to meet me while I'm coming to meet him, right? Can't do that either. Or total grid down, right? I'd like you to think about like if tomorrow or next week the power goes out and your cell phone doesn't work. Is this a Kansas City thing? Is this a Tulsa thing? Is this local or is this nationwide? You have no way of knowing unless you can tune into a radio that has enough range that you can hear people in Virginia going, hey, my power went out and my phones don't work. What happened? And then you hear other people from California who might say, well, we've got a little bit, you can kind of get an idea of how bad the situation is. So Baofeng doesn't cut it. So what do I need to do? Before I get into HF, I'm going to do a little bit of technical talk, right? I'm going to do just a little bit so we can understand about what we're talking about. So I want to talk about frequency and wavelength, right? So radios send out radio waves and they oscillate at a certain frequency, a number of times per second. And a good way of visualizing this is a pendulum, right? So this is one of my antennas for my kit here, and I'm just going to, okay, I wound it wrong. So I'm going to demonstrate with a pendulum how frequency and wavelength interact, right? So let's say I have a short pendulum, and when I start to swing it, it's going to swing fairly fast. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock, right? If I increase the wavelength, I lower the frequency, right? Tick, tock, tick, tock, right? So the radio waves have a frequency, and the lower the frequency, the longer the wavelength, and the longer your antenna needs to be in order for your antenna to work well, right? So if I have a really low frequency that's really long wavelength, I'm going to need a really long antenna to use that, right? And they'll sell you a little short antenna that's safe to use on that frequency, but it won't work well. We'll get into that later. So also another piece of terminology is going to be band. People talk about frequencies and bands, so the 40-meter band or the 20-meter band or the 2-meter band. What is that, right? So I have this stretch of frequencies from low to high, but the FCC, in their infinite wisdom, does not let me just do whatever I want, wherever I want. They kind of divide it up and say, from this chunk to this chunk, we're going to let this be used by FM radio stations, and this chunk to this chunk, this is ham radio guys, and this chunk to this chunk, right? And those are typically described by their wavelength, right? So my wavelength is 40 meters. That's called the 40-meter band, give or take, right? So when we talk about different bands, we're talking about collections of frequencies that are all kind of spread out across the spectrum. Okay, so now we get into the fun stuff. HF radio is the radio that you need to reach those extreme long distances. So what is it? HF stands for high frequency, right? So the funny thing is when they first invented radios, they were fairly low frequency and they got higher and higher as time went on. So everything's very high, super high, ultra high, right? No one really uses low frequency. So the Baofeng is right up here on UHF, ultra high frequency, and VHF, very high frequency. And all of these radio waves behave pretty much like light. In fact, light is actually just a radio wave way over here at like nanometer wavelengths. It's all the same stuff. It travels in a straight line, and if it hits something, it might bounce off of it a little bit, lose a lot of strength, but it doesn't really go through things very well, only certain things like glass, right? So these are all pretty much straight line, and if they hit something, they stop. And the most common thing that they're going to hit is going to be the dirt, right? Earth is curved, so you're going to have a limited range. Below that, you have HF and MF, medium frequency, and this is the frequency that I'm talking about right here. And the great thing about HF is it has this special property where as it hits the upper layers of the atmosphere, it will reflect, bounce off of the upper layers of the atmosphere, and then come back down hundreds of thousands of miles away. And this is the property that we're taking advantage of for totally off-grid communications that can run from a battery that can talk to someone 1,000 miles away, right? So there's a couple, again, to demonstrate here, like space wave right here is that line of sight that I'm talking about. And then HF is the only frequencies that are really capable of reliably bouncing off of those upper layers of the atmosphere close to space. So that's called skywave propagation, right? You have line of sight, space wave, and then you have sky wave bouncing off of the upper layer of the atmosphere. And the way this works generally is your antenna is going to send off radio signals in all directions, just all over the place. You can buy some antennas that kind of focus it a little bit, but there's always a little bit going in all directions. And only some of those are going to come back down to Earth, right? There's different layers of the atmosphere, and some of the layers will kind of eat away at your radio signal over time. They'll kind of wear it out as it passes through them, and other layers will kind of bend it or bounce it back to Earth. And if the frequency is right, it'll bounce back down and come back down where you're trying to communicate with. So this is going to get a lot easier with some visual aids later on. But the gist of it is these different layers have different properties, and the frequencies that you use have different properties in those layers. The higher the frequency, the better it punches through, but the harder it is to reflect and bounce. And the lower the frequency, it gets eaten up more, but it's much easier to kind of bounce back down. And that, combined with the angle that it's hitting the atmosphere, gives you different ranges for different frequencies, right? Is everyone following so far? So this gets a little technical, but the visualizations, I think, really help. The end effect of this is that for any given frequency, there's an angle that's too steep, and there's an angle that's too shallow, typically, and then there's an angle in the middle that works. And those angles, when it bounces up and comes back down, is who I'm talking to. So I end up with basically a donut where my signal can be heard. If they're too close to me, the signal goes more or less straight up, more or less straight down, and goes off into space. It doesn't bounce, and I'm talking to the aliens, I'm not talking to anybody on Earth, right? Or if it's too shallow, it gets eaten up before it can get reflected because it spends more time in that layer of the atmosphere going real shallow, right? So you end up with this donut, and you change the frequency you're using to change the size of that donut. So let's talk practical. These frequencies that you use change a little bit depending on your time of day or how the sun's behaving, but there's some good rules of thumb. On a typical day, I would expect something like the 10 meter band or the 28 megahertz. This is very close to CB, to do something like this, right? If I'm centered right here in the middle of Kansas and I start talking on this radio, it's very, very high frequency. It's like at the very, very upper end of the HF spectrum. So it wants to do a real shallow angle. And I might be able to hit people in Maine or Florida or California or Washington, but I'm not going to be able to hit somebody in Colorado or Missouri or just 60 miles across the way. If they're close enough that it's line of sight, I'll hit them. And if they're far enough that I'm getting this skywave propagation, I'll hit them. But anything in the middle, I don't really hit them that well, right? So this is CB radio, and why people will talk about using their CB and picking up somebody in California, right? As I decrease the frequency, that donut shrinks. So this is the 20 meter band. Ham radio operators love this band. It's really exciting. It's fun. And that will get you pretty much coast to coast coverage, and it's more reliable than the 10 meter band. And you see that donut is starting to shrink, but there's still a large donut hole in the middle called the skip zone where my signal can't be heard, right? So let's go down one more. This is probably most people's favorite band. This is the 40 meter band on HF. It's about 7 megahertz, and it's a great workhorse band. You can cover like an entire region of the country, but you might struggle a little bit trying to get someone on the coast. I can sometimes talk to a guy in Florida with the 40 meter band, but sometimes not, right? Sometimes I need to switch to something else. And sometimes I can talk to someone fairly close with it, but a lot of the time there is a little donut hole here where if they're too close, the 40 meter band just won't work. You know, I'm in Kansas City. I knew someone else on the other side of Kansas City, and we couldn't really talk on the 40 meter band that well, which is crazy because I could talk to guys in Pennsylvania, no problem, right? And then there's a special case. And this is one that people like to talk about, and they make it sound more complicated than it is. It's called NVIS, right? And the military loves this because it's extremely practical, right? So it's called Near Vertical Incident Skywave. And it's when I send the signal pretty much straight up and then straight back down. And all that means, like literally all this means, is I just use a frequency low enough that it wants to go straight up and straight back down and doesn't work very well at range. So get an antenna that works, and use a frequency low enough, and you're doing NVIS. People talk about the perfect NVIS antenna, and maybe that'll make it a little bit better at that job, but don't overthink it. Just use a low frequency and you can do this. And this, I think, is really useful for us because it gives near 100% coverage in a very local area that doesn't depend on terrain. Mountains, hills, valleys, trees, nothing, because the signal is coming from straight up above, right? So it's just like, it's almost like satellite communications. It's just beaming it right down at you. And this might be the kind of coverage you'd expect for that. And this is the range of people that I might be bugging out to. the range of people who are close enough to help me, the range of people that I might actually be able to get to in a reasonable amount of time. So for the real, like, local stuff, NVIS is where you want to be. And that's going to be 80 meter band, 40 meter band, 60 meter band, anything kind of lower like that. Okay. And that is the hardest part of the presentation, the most technical part, and the part that took me a long time to figure out, because people don't dial it down to like kind of like real basics. Everything else is going to be a little easier from here on out. So congrats, you got through the hard part. So let's talk about equipment. What kind of equipment do I need to use for this? So we talked about frequency and wavelength, right? Any antenna or any radio that I can hold in my hand with an antenna this long is not going to be able to do HF, right? They might be able to listen to HF, but without an antenna that's extremely long, they're not going to be able to do that. These radios can be small, but because they require an antenna that's 20, 30, 40 meters long, they're typically designed to be set on a table, right? But you can do listen only for not a lot of money, and it's really where I recommend you start, because you don't need a license of any kind, and you can get a lot of good information from it, and you can learn a lot. And the one place I really recommend you start is this little guy, the RTL SDR USB dongle. They're about 45 bucks, and they will listen to anything from 0.5 megahertz all the way up to 1900, which is everything the Baofeng does, way above the Baofeng, everything lower, all of HF, like every radio signal you might be interested in, short of like Wi-Fi, right? And RTL SDR. And if you go to my YouTube channel, I got a couple of videos on that as well. You do need to plug them into a computer to run, and you need to download some software, but the software is free. I've actually got one up on my booth right now. If you want to play around with it, see what you can hear. I've got my long wire in the tree, and stop over after the presentation, and I'll show it off a little bit. I love talking about this nerdy stuff, right? You can also use a shortwave receiver, just like little handheld radio receivers. You're going to want one with SSB, which is called single sideband. It's a special type of modulation that ham radio operators use that's more power efficient. And a lot of shortwave receivers will only do AM, which is like commercial shortwave broadcast. So you can't listen to ham signals with them. If you get one with SSB, you can listen to ham signals, and that gives you a lot more opportunities. These can be little handhelds, but in order to use them properly, you're going to have to connect a wire to that antenna and then get it up in the tree. It doesn't have to be super long. 10, 20 feet will work okay. Longer is better. So if you get 30 or 40 feet, I like 50. I think that's a good compromise. If you got 100 feet, even better. So those are your receive-only rigs, and they're 45 to 100 bucks, give or take. You can buy more expensive ones, but these will get you started, and they're enough. If you want to be able to talk two-way, which I think is what most people want to do, you need to get an HF transceiver, a transmitter and receiver, and these are significantly more expensive. They make some really cheap ones. Some of them are pretty good. A lot of them are not. Typically, for a decent one, you're going to be looking at 500 bucks to $2,000, right? And $2,000 is the super premium. Typically, 500 to 1,000 is where they run. And these are tremendously powerful pieces of communication equipment. They usually run off of 12 volts DC, so you can plug them right into your car batteries or into your car. Or if you have a solar setup that's 12 volts, you can plug them right into that. This one on the left here is the Xiegu G90. That's my personal favorite for like a utility radio. It does 20 watts of power. It's got a little display on the front that's a spectrum scan, so it'll show you, instead of being able to like tune around and listen, it'll show you little spikes of all the signals, and you can see multiple signals at once. And it's 20 watts of power. It's fairly small. It's fairly lightweight, fairly power efficient. It's a great rig. The one on the right is another example of like the large desktop rigs. I believe that one's a Kenwood, but there's a lot of them that are that big. You don't need to get one that big. You can get one a lot smaller. And the other piece of equipment you're going to need, and the most important one, is your antenna, right? So as we talked about before, HF is low frequency, and you need a long antenna. So if my wavelength is 20 meters, my antenna wants to be at least 1/4 of that. So 5 meters, right? Or the 40 meter band, it wants to be at least 10 meters, which is like 30 feet, right? I'm not going to have a pole that's 30 feet long. I can get smaller ones that will work, but the smaller they get, the less efficient they get. And this doesn't have to be that expensive. I really recommend you build your own, because it's literally just a long piece of thin wire from the hardware store. And I use 28 gauge, which is like very thin, but you can use whatever gauge you have. You just got to make it the right length. Now, any antenna that you plug into your radio will work to listen, at least a little bit. If it's the right length, it'll work better. But if you're trying to transmit, the antenna has to be matched to the frequency you're trying to transmit on, or close enough, right? So if I buy an antenna that says it's for the 40-meter band and I transmit on the 60-meter band or the 20-meter band, it's going to be bad for my radio. It will actually damage my radio and can burn out the transmitter. So you got to make sure it's matched. The way you check that is it's called SWR, and your radio should have a little meter. So you'll have to look for that meter on your radio, and before you transmit, make sure that your SWR is low, which is good. You can use antenna tuners to make an antenna that's not matched for your frequency safe for your radio, but they're not magic, and they won't make an antenna work if it's way too small, or basically if it's way too small. If it's way too big, it'll probably work pretty well. So the easy solution is called a long wire, and that's because it's a long wire, and that's it. I just take a long wire in a tree, and I take the end of it, and my radio's got a little coaxial connector on the outside, like your old TV coax with the shell on the outside and the pin in the middle. That wire just goes bloop right in the middle. That's your positive terminal. The outside is your ground. I use adapters because I don't like to stick a raw wire in there because it'll fall out. So you get little adapters, and they have it's called a binding post adapter. It has like a little red pole and a little black pole and a little screw terminal that you can tighten them down with. And then you just connect that long wire to the red positive, and that's a great receive antenna. You can use it for transmit too. It's not great, but it'll work. You're probably going to want to use a tuner for that. But this is great for starting out, and it's really easy to set up. This one is really useful, but it's a little bit limited. It's one of these small antennas that's not quite as efficient, and it's listen only. A non-resonant loop or a receive loop. They make some of these that transmit too, but they're very expensive. The loop is like the size of a hula hoop, and it can receive some of those very low frequencies. But the really cool thing about it is it has what's called a null. So there's two directions. So if I have the loop like this, it'll receive pretty well in every direction except for directly in front of me and directly behind me. It's completely deaf in that direction, right? Because of the way that the radio waves combine. It's technical stuff that I don't really understand, to be honest with you. Just trust me, it works, right? So if I'm in an apartment and my neighbor's TV is kicking off a lot of noise and I can't hear radio signals off of the static from his TV, because a lot of electronics kick off radio interference, I can actually turn this loop, point to that interference, and all of a sudden I can't hear that interference and I can hear everything else. And they're also nice and small, so this is great for like in an apartment if you don't have the space to put a long wire in a tree. But again, listen only. They're not expensive either. The one I like is about $50. This one is the dipole antenna. This is the antenna that all other antennas are compared against, literally. Like in the book, when they give specs of an antenna, they say how much gain relative to a dipole, right? So it's just that coax, the positive in the middle and the negative on the outside. The negative goes to a quarter wave of wire going that way, and the positive goes to a quarter wave going that way, and then in the middle they meet into your coax, into your antenna. You can build this with stuff from the hardware store, and they work really well. They're very efficient. The phrase I've heard is dipoles are easy. It's hard to build an antenna better than a dipole, but it's really easy to build an antenna a lot worse than a dipole, right? So this is a great place to start. The only disadvantage is they're really only resonant on one frequency that you design them for. Technically, they're resonant on other frequencies, but they're not frequencies we're allowed to use if you're making it for one ham band. So typically, the dipole is a one frequency antenna, right? But they're really handy, and you can improvise these things too. If I have a piece of coax cable and I have something with a lot of wire in it, I could build one of these. With like I don't even have to solder anything. I just twist wire together and it works. I've done it. The upgrade, and this is what I sell with my radio kits and what I would love for you guys to build. I have YouTube videos on how to build this. It's called the end-fed half-wave. It works similar to a dipole, but instead of having like two ends where I've got to hoist that entire antenna up in the air and I've got to hoist all of the weight of all of that coax cable into the air as well, this is, you feed it from one corner. So I have a little transformer, plug it into my radio, and then this wire just goes all the way up into the tree and then all the way back down on the other side, or just straight up, right? And I don't have to, the part of the antenna that sends most of the signal is on the dipole, it's the middle. On the end-fed half-wave, well, it's also the middle, but it's the middle from this end to that end, so it's higher up in the air. So the end-fed half-wave is great for that because it's easier to get in the air. It's just a tiny little wire. That's the one that I've got set up right now for receive is an end-fed half-wave. And the great thing about them is they are resonant on multiples of that frequency. So if I design it for 7 megahertz, it'll also work on 14 megahertz, and it'll also work on 21 megahertz, and it'll also, right? So if I have the 80 meter band, double that frequency is the 40 meter band. I get 2 for 1. And then double that frequency is the 20 meter band. I get 3 for 1, right? So I don't have to do anything to change the frequency. And it's very efficient at all of those. So I love these. A little harder to build. A lot of people sell these. If you want to buy one, they're going to be 80, 90 bucks, give or take. You just got to get the right length of wire for the frequencies you're using. And many, many, many more, right? If we wanted to talk antennas, we could talk antennas all day long. Everybody's got their favorite antenna. It's kind of like talking to gun guys about their guns, right? Like if you don't carry this particular gun and this particular caliber, you're going to get killed in the streets, right? Like people get particular about their antennas. Don't worry about it, right? Just get a full-size antenna that's the right length for the frequency and run. The differences between them are just like the differences between everyone's favorite flavor of 9mm handgun, right? It's pretty small. It's not nothing, but it's pretty small. So don't overthink it. Just get on the air. You'll learn more that way. I overthought it, and it held me back a lot. So then we're going to talk a little bit about listening to ham signals. So if I get on the air, what am I listening to, and what can I learn from this? The main thing I want you to take away from this is that ham radio operators have call signs, right? And their call sign is kind of like their license plate, right? They're required to give it out on the air at least every 10 minutes, and it's tied to who they are and where they are. So what you can do is you can look up their call sign in an online database, and it'll tell you where they're from. So I can get an idea how far away these signals are from me, right? And this is great because I can just tune in, write down a few call signs, and figure out what kind of propagation I'm getting. And if I can hear people in the same region that I'm trying to reach, I could probably talk to that region, right? The way that these radios work is transmitting and receiving are kind of symmetrical, right? If I'm transmitting from a radio in this direction and it can be heard here, if he's transmitting with like the exact same radio and the exact same antenna, I could hear him, right? So if I can hear them, they could probably hear me if I were to be talking. So even without a license, I can get an idea of if I could communicate with these regions in an actual emergency. So on that topic, let's talk licenses, right? There's a lot of resources on how to get your license. I've got some that I really like. One of them is, it's called the No Nonsense Study Guide. It's by a guy, KB6NU. That's his call sign. It basically just takes all the questions that they could possibly ask you in the license exam, which is a pool of questions that they publish ahead of time, and just tells you as a sentence the answer to each one of them, and they organize it in the right order. It's just what you need to pass the test, and it's the fastest way to get your license. I like it. But regarding licenses, you don't need a license to own ham radio equipment or to buy ham radio equipment or to listen with ham radio equipment. You only need a license to transmit with ham radio equipment, right? So you can buy this stuff, practice with it, learn what you can by listening, and build some antennas and get most of the way there, even without your license. But really, without the license, you can't practice it effectively, and you can't be really sure that you're doing it right. So I really recommend people get their license, but you can do a lot without it. And I understand people's hesitancy to get their license because one of the requirements is I got to put my name in this database that's attached to my address that other people can look up. But can be a P.O. box. So get a P.O. box. That's my address. They know roughly what region I'm in because I got to be able to get mail from there, but at least they don't have my street address, right? Not anymore. You used to have to learn Morse code as well. You used to have to pass an exam with Morse code. They did that away with that a while ago, and man, it would have taken me a lot longer to get my license if I had to get good at Morse code because that stuff, it's like learning a different language. So ham radio operators will also use a bunch of abbreviations, right? So you'll learn them over time. Don't worry about it too much. But one of them is like CQ. That's basically a ham radio operator saying, anyone who can hear me, I'm looking for someone to talk to, right? And then they have QRZ, which is who is calling me. And all of these, they come from like old history of like when radio got started. It was mostly French guys, and they used abbreviations for common French phrases. You'll get used to them over time, or you won't. It's not really that big of a deal. If it's really that important, they're probably using plain English for the most important parts. So it's fine. Just know you're going to hear a lot of acronyms. And then one of them is like 73 is just like best wishes, see you later, right? So those are not call signs. That's really what you got to know, is that that's not a call sign. A call sign is usually a couple letters, a number, a couple other letters, and that's what you want to log. And typically the format of an exchange is calling out, giving my call sign. Someone else comes back with their call sign. I tell them how loud and clear they are. 5-9 is what they usually say. And then they tell me how loud and clear they are. And then we're like, okay, nice, cool. I got you. I got your, Pokemon card. I know who you are, and I talk to you. I can write that down on my list. Off we go. So that's roughly what you're going to hear when you get on the air. So I'd like to take a little bit of break right now because we've covered quite a bit, and kind of open it up to questions and answers. There's my YouTube channel and my email address. I'm a nerd about this stuff. I love to talk about it. If you got questions, send me an email. And then if we got time after questions, I've got a couple more slides that we can do as like a bonus round. So anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts? Man, it must have been a solid presentation. Total understanding.
All right.
Pick one.
Just pick one and we'll work around the room.
You said something about you got way into the weeds, and it took you a long time to get around to getting your license. I'm kind of the same type, where I get lost in the weeds and don't get around to doing the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in that more direct route.
Yeah, it's tough. What got me in the weeds was I got too paranoid about what if I do something wrong and the FCC comes knocking on my door and issues me a big fine, right? If you're like, part of the license exam is the basics of the rules. And really, if you step on your toes a little bit, you do something slightly wrong, most people are just going to tell you, hey, you should be doing this other thing. And they're not going to, unless you're deliberately trying to make people mad, they're probably not going to call the radio cops on you. So don't worry about it that much. And the other thing is, I was really worried about breaking my radio because I heard about like SWR, and I was like, what if I do the wrong thing and my radio burns up? They're a little more durable than I was giving them credit for, right? You can break them pretty quick, but if you accidentally key up and it's not right, it's probably not going to toast it. And as long as you measure your SWR and your SWR is good, you're not going to break your radio. So those two things were what really made me go down the Google hole and spend all my time. And also trying to figure out what antenna I wanted to build, right? Just like I said, just get a full-size antenna and build it. You can always improve it later, but honestly, once I found the one that was the easiest to set up, the difference between all these antennas is pretty small. So
communication of the submarine, very low frequency. Is that coming from a satellite?
Sorry, say that again?
Communication, when I was on a submarine, we had very low frequency.
VLF. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, those aren't coming from satellites. So VLF is interesting. VLF is really very low frequency, and it's measured in like kilohertz. And the wavelength of these things is like 500 kilometers long, right? So yes. And the special property of VLF is it'll actually go underwater, which almost no radio waves will do, and like through the earth too. So they actually have a couple radio stations. One of them is up in Maine, and I forget where the others are, but they're these antenna arrays that are like kilometers across, and they're still way smaller than they need to be. So they're not very efficient. But yeah, that's how they communicate to the submarines. And the submarines can't communicate back. It's one way, but that's like the dead man switch. So another thing that, well, exactly. But one of the other things you might be able to hear on HF, which is kind of fun. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of numbers stations. So like this was a kind of a Cold War thing. And they're doing it right now. So over in Iran, like when the whole Iran conflict kicked off, a number station came online and people were like, this is a little spooky. So what they are is it's a long range radio station that nobody claims. Like nobody says, this is my radio station. And all it is it's just a voice reading out, typically it's numbers. And it'll just be like in the Cold War, it was like some Russian voice going like 4, 7, 9, 3, right? And they'll come on at certain times. There's websites where they track these. And what these are is the best estimate, right? And pretty likely, because everybody's got them, is it's a way to communicate with spies and secret agents, right? Without them having equipment that would give them away as a spy or a secret agent, right? Like if you're some Cold War guy, you have a shortwave radio receiver, which is off-the-shelf commercial equipment. I can hear people from the United States on these number stations, and I can write those numbers down and decode them with a cipher, and then that's my orders, right? So the VLF station is kind of like a number station in the sense that it's like a one-way transmission to someone that we don't want them to know where this person is. But that's the other good thing about HF is it's actually really hard to track down where it's coming from. So unless someone's really sophisticated, if you're using like NVIS HF, unless they're really, really close to you, it's hard for them to track you down too. So one other advantage.
Yeah, outside of like VHF and UHF, I've gotten pretty good at finding people to talk to through that. But as far as HF goes, how are you finding people to talk to, like other than SDR or just scanning through bands?
I've never had a problem finding someone to talk to on HF. Every single time I tune into any HF band that's open at the time, because depending on the atmospheric conditions, some of them, like the really high ones, will just stop working. So whenever I tune into the 40-meter band, there's 20 or 30 people on it, like 24/7, 365, right? There's always somebody to talk to. I just scroll through and I listen for somebody calling CQ.
So how do they manage the traffic when it gets that busy on a specific band?
It's kind of anarchy, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's not really anarchy because there's politeness and rules, and you'll learn that when you get your license, which is don't talk over other people. Don't willingly interfere with other people. If you willingly interfere with other people, the FCC will show up and start yelling at you, right? And there's kind of a protocol how ham radio operators do that that's sort of self-organizing. It's really kind of cool. But yeah, that's the great thing about HF is that pretty much no matter where you are, you're going to find people to talk to instantly, and you're going to be able to pick up information instantly, which is why I think it's got a lot to offer because the range on it is just so great.
Other question is, when you're trying to reach people on HF, are you going out and aiming your antenna to specific directions each time you want to reach a certain area, or?
They make antennas like that. I don't have one. The reason why is because I'd have to build a big tower for it or put it on top of my house, and then I'd have to have all sorts of hardware.
Motorized.
I don't. I just get an antenna up in the air that puts it out in all directions. And then I just pick the appropriate frequency based on how far away I want to talk. If I want to talk to someone in Missouri, I pick those low frequencies that are more regional. If I want to talk to somebody in New York, I pick those higher frequencies. So the way this would work in practice, because these antennas have to be set up, is these aren't going to be like a walkie-talkie that you can just leave on and talk to somebody at any time unless you're at home. This is going to be something you set up ahead of time and say, hey, if the grid goes down, I'm going to contact you at this time of day, at this frequency, and we'll meet there, right? So like a comms plan might be, so there's one that, there's a couple organizations in ham radio that do emergency preparedness, and one of them is called AMRON, and they have what's called the 333 plan, which is like every third hour on channel 3, if the radio has channels, for 3 minutes at the top of the hour. So at 12 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, you just call at that time, right? So you come up with a communications plan. Like I had one with my folks during COVID because I was a little spooked, and it was, if the lights go out at the next half hour mark, either top of the hour or bottom of the hour, we're going to meet at this particular frequency and this particular time.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions for Jake? If not, let's give it up for Jake real quick. Thank you for his time.
Okay. I do have
you have the bonus thing.
That's right. Bonus round. So
yes, quick bonus round.
A little bit extra time. So
I jumped the gun.
No worries. So
9 millimeter.
One other really cool thing that I think that is on HF that you guys might want is HF digital modes. These got a bit of a learning curve, but basically it's kind of like dial-up internet over HF. The advantage of it is it's way more efficient than voice. So like 5 watts on a digital mode works as well as like 100 watts of voice. And this one is right here. So you can see I'm getting like text coming across, right? So I listen to this tone, and it's like, tones like warbling, like dial-up internet. And then the computer will decode that into a text message. And then I can send back that same way. There's a couple of organizations that do this. One of them is, I don't know if you guys have heard of a guy, S2 Underground. He does like an intelligence and news reporting YouTube channel. He set up an HF net, a comms plan with frequencies and times and protocols using a digital mode. And it's every Thursday at 7. So if the grid goes down, that's where I'm going to figure out what happened, right? The other one is I have 2 radio kits that I'm selling. One of them is a listen-only kit called the Field Information Radio. It's one of those SDRs plus a laptop and a manual and the antenna, and it'll run off of 12 volts, start to finish kit for listen-only. And then I've also got a transceiver kit called the Cedar Box, the Complete Emergency Digital Amateur Radio Box. And it's the laptop, the HF radio, the antenna, everything in the box, with the manual, both of those come with a couple hours of one-on-one instruction if you have any questions with them, right? If you're interested in either of those, come see me over there, or if you want to play with the SDR and see what you can hear.
All right, now you can clap.
Sorry.
Tell everybody again where they can find you.
First Person Prepping on YouTube. At firstpersonprepping@proton.me is my email, or I am right there over on my booth. So. Absolutely. That's another good point too, is if you get into this and you find a local ham radio club, and there's a lot of guys who would love to talk to you about this stuff, just be aware that they are going to want to get very technical most likely. Oh, sure. Yeah. Perfect. Appreciate it.
Token of our appreciation, sir. There's
Thank
some
you,
coffee
man.
chits in there and other things to help caffeinate you.
Appreciate it. I didn't
Crushed
have to.
it. Fantastic, brother. All right, look over here at the Todd.
All right.
Nailed it. Thank you, brother.
Go get some food.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, the Todd.
All right, we have one final event or session for the day. I know it's the one people have been waiting for with Randall from the YouTube channel Grunt Proof. That will start at 3 p.m. Everyone knows our favorite bullion dealer over here, Tom, with Tom's Prepper Hub. He is unfortunately unable to stay until the giveaway. He has purchased opportunity tickets. He has placed those opportunity tickets in the hands of our booth. He has stated that the next person who spends $40 on opportunity tickets will get all of his opportunity tickets for free. So be sure to go see the ladies and Jamie at the front end. Please purchase those tickets. That's the only way we fund this. We have to make so much in order to rent this for the next 2 or 3 events in the spring and the fall. So please go see them. And we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock.